You are live. Sweet. Another live stream during quarantines. Pretty interesting stuff. Hope everybody's doing all right. Probably give it a couple of minutes before we get started. Give some people time to jump on. Get some beer. Do whatever you got to do. I guess while we're waiting, maybe we could start something in the chat. If anybody's used Amplify or any of these services, let me know. Get some chat activity going. Hope everybody's doing all right with the quarantines. We'll go ahead and get started with this. So, going over part 2 of the Amplify series. Gonna build this. So we've got a blog app that we started building from last time. We're just gonna continue building onto that, and we're gonna use a bunch more Amplify services and get more in depth. And then next part we'll go over the pricing and how to optimize everything and really polish it up and finish styling and whatnot. So first off, I want to say thank you to everybody who's been part of the meetup group for the last year now. This is the 1 year anniversary meetup. It's kind of an awesome feat, so appreciate you guys for supporting us, and hopefully you get some benefit out of this. We'll keep doing them. So my name is Austin Lovelace. I'm a AWS community hero and a cloud architect at PhotoBucket and Giraffe. So our agenda that we had for this whole series was we started off last month doing an intro to Amplify. We talked about what is Amplify. And we started building a basic full stack app with trying to replicate what medium.com does. So for part 2, we're going to talk about a little bit more. We're going to go a little bit more in depth over Amplify and what all we have available to us. We're not going to use all these things that are available to us. There's just not enough time for me to build everything that's possible, but I'll kind of give you guys a high level of what is possible. And then we'll go ahead and start building a more complex schema and a more complex application. And then in part 3, we're going to talk about how does this scale, how does it work with having millions of users using the application? Is Amplify good for production? And how can we improve performance? And maybe I'll add some more features into the application. So for part 2, like I said, we're going to talk about what all Amplify can do. We're going to go in depth with directives, making relationships between your tables, having mocking and testing, authentication roles, connecting it to S3, and then writing a bunch of React. So if any of you guys have any questions, go ahead and put them in the comments at any point. I'm reading the comments while we're going through this, so I can stop and pause and answer any questions that you guys may have. So going in depth a little bit more about what Amplify can do. I didn't have enough time to really build out the entire scope of what Amplify could do in this project, so we're going to kind of walk through the docs, because I think the docs are pretty well written, and we're going to kind of look at the different aspects of Amplify, what all Amplify has available to it. So with that, they've got all these different configurations that we can have, all these different features between directives and storage, relational databases, config parameters, Lambda triggers, mocking and testing, and all kinds of stuff. So we're going to go in depth with what we have available to us. So first off, I just want to bring up, if you go to the docs, they update their docs all the time. They've changed since the beginning of me starting building this a month ago to now. They've changed a ton already. They continue updating this, which is a good and bad thing, because some things are updated and you have to rewrite some code, but it's good that they're really on top of this. Seems like AWS really wants us to use this service. Pretty awesome. But so to get started, if you go ahead and go to the Amplify docs, I will paste that in the chat. Is the audio better now? Let me know. I just turned it up a little bit. Okay, so hopefully our audio is a little better, but So if you're like looking at the Amplify docs, there's a ton of things that Amplify can do. So it's basically just a framework to go into a little bit of recap on what we did in the beginning for part 1. So Amplify is just this framework that we can use to basically help us accelerate our process of building an application on AWS. And the application is going to be serverless. And it mostly interacts with JavaScript, but you can create like mobile applications with it. I haven't done anything with the mobile app side, so I can't speak on that a ton, but we built all of this with React. So going into the different features we have here. So if you look at our analytics, we've got basically this is how we could set up Amazon Pinpoint or Kinesis, and then we could do like real-time analytics and say like build campaigns on what our customers are doing within the app, and then schedule like push notifications. We could have go out, or we could send emails, and we could bake all this into the application. And so this is really great for kind of customizing your product for user if you're building like a social media application or an e-commerce site, something like that. So you can add analytics, you can like configure it into your application, and then you could basically say like on whatever page you're on or whatever button you want it to trigger to be like logged. You can just say like whenever somebody clicks this button, send those analytics straight to Pinpoint, and you can like start building a bunch of data based on the users who are using that. And then we could go ahead and create a campaign for whoever is there and personalize the experience. And so you can also use AWS Personalize, which came out last year, that is like a recommendation engine that Amazon built that you can use to take Pinpoint's data, send all the data to Pinpoint, and then have it go to Personalize and really build like a customized like recommendation system like for e-commerce or a social media application. And so I just want to like cover really quickly that the purpose of this course isn't to necessarily like teach you everything there is to know about Amplify, but it's to like give you the tools to be able to go out and learn for yourself, and then be able to build your applications. And hopefully like this like basic starter course will basically get you where you need to go so you can use this in the real world. I just want to cover that really quick. So then you have like the different types of APIs you can integrate with your application. So we've got GraphQL and REST. We're going to cover this more whenever we get to this tab, but I just wanted to briefly talk about the different APIs you could use. So this would be using AppSync, and then this one would be using API Gateway. We covered that a little bit on the last course, so we're going to skip through a bit of these. So in interactions, this is a pretty cool little feature. Won't talk about it too long, but this would be like how you could integrate a chatbot into your application. And so you could just like configure your chatbot to come up, and then you could say like whenever somebody says, or whenever somebody's on the application for X amount of time, you could have your chatbot come up, and then you could have it interact with your users, and then you could pretty much customize it however you want. And Amplify has this all like built in for you to use right out of the box, so it's really easy to set up. And then you could go into predictions. Let's say you needed to add like text to speech or anything like that. AWS has all of their managed machine learning services like Translate, Poly. Here's a list of them right here. And so you could use all of these different services in your application pretty easily. It's just going into the CLI and saying, hey, I want to add predictions, and then you could go ahead and do the text to speech like I said a moment ago, and then you could just start converting whatever data is coming in, and Amazon will handle all of that for you through Amplify. And then we have like a couple other options here. We can do some pub sub, and we can do some push notifications. And so you could set this up with like your mobile app. And there is a way to set this up if you were building a desktop application that you can kind of configure Amplify to do, but out of the box, Amplify doesn't technically support desktop push notifications. This is more based around like mobile apps and stuff. And then you can have different storage, so we could add like S3, which we did in this application. And then lastly right here, you can add AR and VR scenes into your application with AWS Sumerian. And yeah, I've not looked at this at all, but I know that it exists. So it's a pretty cool feature. I don't know exactly how easy it is to integrate into your app, but it looks like along with everything else, it's just a simple configuration, and then you can probably start throwing it into your application. Maybe we could do that on the next iteration of the app. So a couple of things that you'll see throughout the app that we have is the different UI components. So first we have an authentication component, and they say like legacy and latest, so it looks like I'm assuming that they're just updating their old stuff and now considering it latest, because there's no issues with any of the legacy components as of right now. But this is basically how our sign up window is going to look. I didn't customize it at all. I just took it straight out of the box how it was. And you do have access to customizing this a bit, like changing the text and changing the color. So that's pretty sweet that you can just bake in authentication into your app. And then the legacy stuff we do use often in here. I have some things for storage. So we're using S3 to upload like user profile images or blog thumbnail images or post thumbnail images. And so I'm using this photo picker, which is just this little React component that will allow me to choose photos from my local machine. And then this S3 image is a way that I can like pull my images from S3, and this is all secured and it's like built in just with your application. And so they're doing like signed URLs to retrieve the S3 images, so you don't have to worry about any security issues or anything like that. You can just use the UI tool and then it will pull it up for you. And then you can get into like Chatbox and then the Sumerian tool here as well. And then go a little bit deeper into some code. This is what I really wanted to get into. So this is where like you'll probably spend most of your time in the documentation of like trying to figure out what's the next thing you need to add, or like how do I set up my tables, how do I set up my authentication, how do I set up like a more complex DynamoDB schema, how do I add lambdas, how do I add like external HTTP endpoints. So these are all the things that you could do with different directives. And so these directives that we have available to us are at model, at key, at auth, at function, connection, versioned, searchable predictions, and HTTP. So their docs are pretty great at like explaining how to use these in different use cases, and they even have examples built throughout the documentation on it. But for the at model, this is basically defining that I want to have a DynamoDB table. That's pretty much the core of it. So whenever you define your DynamoDB table, you could say like, I want to have, let's see, a better one here, right here. So we could say, here's a type post, and I want to have an ID, a title, and different tags. And then if you've ever used GraphQL, like you're defining the type of whatever this field is going to be, and this is going to be an array of strings for this example. And so then you can just define like, okay, my post object is going to have all of this. And then you could just write that into your schema file, and then Amplify will build you a DynamoDB table with these fields and expect all of these different data types. That's the gist of what a model is at a high level. So an at key field is important for if you wanted to add like global secondary indexes to do like different connections, or if you wanted to have like quicker queries for your application. You could set up like an at key, and then you could give it a field and say like email, and so this will create a GSI of email. And so this is like really good. I think we have a better example down here, like this by status. We could query directly to say like what is the status of this object, instead of having to go like look through the entire model. We could just go straight by that GSI and have like a little bit of a more efficient query. And then we've got auth. Auth is where we're going to define like the different cognito or IAM or API key authentication rules. For our app, we have cognito set up for our authentication provider. But so right here you could say at auth allow owner. So this would mean that whoever created the post would be considered the owner, and that field would automatically be created in DynamoDB. Behind the scenes, we're using like a VTL, velocity templating language, and that basically will say like if no owner field, or whoever is the logged in user, then they're the new owner of this post. And so if austin@gmail.com is logged in, then I'm going to be the owner of this post whenever I create this post. And you can specify different operations that you have available to you, or if you don't, by default, they're all available to you. But the weird thing about that is, let's say for this field, if I didn't have read access on here and I just specified this, then I have explicitly defined what I have access to, and that means I wouldn't have read access to my post now. And so if you don't define stuff, then that means that anybody will have access to it. But if you're gonna define everything here, and you don't define read, then you're not gonna have access to that. So we'll see that a little bit later on whenever we look at the application, and you could see where I'm like kind of leaving off read so that it's just kind of inherited. And then these auth rules could get even more complex. You could say, right here, see they kind of go into depth about like, if I leave off the create, then other people are allowed to create and I'm allowed to create. So if you like explicitly define it, then this person's allowed to have it. Otherwise, like everybody has it. And then you could get a little bit more complex, and we do this in the application. We kind of took this idea that they had here and brought it into the app. And so you have owner fields that you could define. So you could say like, what if I'm an editor? And then you could have like how they have here an array of editors. And so if you're creating a blog application like we are, and you wanted to have like multiple editors on a post because multiple people work for this publication and they wanted to be able to work together and collaborate, you could say like, okay, give them access to update and read so that they can go in and update the post that you created. And so this would be a good example of how you could expand your authentication. And this gets a lot more complex, going into different kinds of groups. So if anybody's like familiar with Cognito, you can set up like different authentication groups in Cognito. And so we could allow like a group of admins to have access to everything, which is what this is saying, because they're not explicitly defining anything. They automatically have all of the different CRUD operations. And so the admin can do anything to the salary model. But let's say you had like right here, you had this editors, you had an admin, and you had an owner. So anybody who was an admin in the admin group would have the same access as the owner. And then anybody in the editors who would be considered an editor would only have access to update. Let's see if we can find a little bit of a more complex one. Get some more groups. But you can go like more in depth with your different group types, and you can have like multiple kinds of groups, and say that you had an admin group, and then you had like a writers group, and then your writers could only have access to like updating and reading different blogs, and then you had maybe the admin group or the editors group who had access to do full CRUD to the blogs, like delete them and stuff, or to your posts. And that's kind of what we built into the application. So that gets pretty in depth with going into auth, and auth is going to be like a pretty core part of like how the entire app works. So you can set up like different authentication rules and make sure that everybody has their different role into the application. So then going a bit further into functions, so you can set up like a Lambda function that acts as the resolver for your AppSync query or mutation. And so you could set it up to say like, if I needed to send data to a Lambda to go through a transformation or whatever it may be, then you could set that up. Yeah. So question from Doug, he says, are the auth policies that are defined enforced server side with these definitions? Yes, they are. Yeah, so like basically how these are defined is they have these, let me show you here. So you have like a velocity templating language, this VTL, that's defined, and it's how it's like the logic for your resolver. So there's no like lambdas or anything like that handle this kind of like that logic that goes on. Let's see if it's not negate ignore. Okay, it is. We'll get more in depth and I'll show you more whenever we build the app. But here it is. So like you have these templating language that are built out, and they'll say like, take my data and then check to see if whoever's logged in is a part of this group, or if they're a part of this like editors field or whatever it may be. And then if they are, then they could do the operation. So yeah, it is server side. This is all like server side logic. So then you'd have to go write that to match it on your front end as well. Like, yeah, that's pretty much how that's set up. And we'll get more in depth, and I'll show you like exactly what I mean by that. I deleted the application before this so that we could rebuild it, so I can't go back and show you right at this moment. But moving a little bit forward, so then if you wanted to say I have multiple different tables, like if you were like in a relational database, this is still DynamoDB, but if you could picture what it would be like in a relational database, you would have multiple different tables, and those tables would have connections to each other through like your foreign keys, and then you could reference them. Well, the similar thing happens here whenever we add a connection field or a connection directive, and then we could say, hey, this creates a global secondary index. Whenever I create a team, it references this team model, and they have a connection together. So it says, whenever I create a project and I want to see who's a part of the team, then I could look across tables and grab my team model. And we do that all throughout the app. I'll show you a bit more in depth with that. And so right here, they're defining the specific connection on a particular field that they have defined. So the team ID, so it's going to get the ID, and that's how you'll create that global secondary index. And then you can get a little bit more in depth and say like, I have a many-to-many relationship, or I have a one-to-many relationship. So I could say that a post has multiple comments. So you would just have an array syntax wrapped around your comments object. And then you're just saying like the global secondary index is going to be by post, and we're going to connect on this field. So then whenever I query this, I'm going to grab the comment, or yeah, the comment ID, and I'm going to have like all my comments there. Belongs to is essentially the same thing. And then we could do a many-to-many connection. I think they've got a little bit of an easier one example. Maybe not. So basically with the many-to-many connection, you need to have a third table. And if you're worked with like Postgres or anything like that before, you'd create like your join table. That's pretty much the same thing. And then that table is just going to be a table of indexes that would connect through the other different tables. And then whenever you're querying this through AppSync, it's kind of seamless because you're just going through and saying like, okay, I'm going to create one post, create two posts, and I'm going to create like these links and say like a post editor and a user, and then they're both like connected together to say like this one user created this one post, this user created this other post, and this post went to this other user. So then you have like a many-to-many relationship between a post can have multiple editors, and an editor can have multiple posts. And the application, we kind of did this a little bit of a different way, but the code is there. I have it commented out, so you could kind of use it for yourself if you wanted to. You could just uncomment it and then run an Amplify push and use that. So then you could go into like versioning your different objects, do a little bit more version control. The searchable directive is to set up Elasticsearch to say if you wanted to have a particular field that you were going to search up a lot and wanted to be able to do quick lookups, and you could set up a add searchable directive. And then I think our last two are predictions. So with this, we could set up like recognition or poly or anything like that, one of those managed machine learning services that AWS has, and then connect that to whatever action that we wanted. And then HTTP is saying like if I had an external endpoint and I wanted to add that to my Amplify application, this is brand new. Like say like they update the docs all the time. Like I feel like this was updated in the last 2 weeks that they added this. And so you can now go and say I want to connect this list post to this endpoint, and then you could define whatever you're expected from that endpoint, and then you could integrate it into your Amplify app, which is really sweet. Cool. So covered a lot of things there. this is pretty much like the core of the of Amplify itself, in my opinion, is all these different directives that you could use, because these really make it easy, and you don't really like having to know about as much of what's going on behind the scenes, but to get more in depth, you also kind of have to. But yeah, the directives are like really amazing, really easy to use. And then you could define like different S3 storage objects and whatnot into your application. You could connect like relational databases. Right now, I think the only one it supports is Aurora. And then all your code is generated whenever you create these schemas. We talked about like, let's see, actually, they might have some code here. Okay, so back to what your question was earlier, Doug, about the different VTL templates and how they're like kind of checking. So this is an example of like a really basic template, but you could picture in here they would have like, this is kind of defining a variable, and maybe you'd have like a variable or some way of importing your cognito information, and you'd basically be able to say like, if the cognito user belongs to this particular group, then allow them to do the operation. If not, send them back a response that says they're not authorized, and then you can have all of that logic here. And the benefit of like this entire architecture is that you don't have like any lambdas or servers running. It's just like this managed GraphQL server that goes directly to Dynamo and back, and so it's super fast and super cheap. And so there's like no worrying about optimizing lambdas or anything like that. For the most part, you can run all your logic in here, at least for like your basic queries and stuff. And then we could go into like the different parameters you have. So if you wanted to say, by default, Amplify gives you 5 read capacity units and write capacity units, but you needed to increase your application, you're starting to get to scale, and you needed to increase this, you could just add this to your parameters file and in your Amplify configuration, and then automatically it'll change it for you. Or if you wanted to add, for whatever reason they don't have it listed here, but there's another parameter for adding in point-in-time backups. And so if you wanted to add backups to every DynamoDB table you create, you can just add the different parameter, and it'll automatically do that for you. So then the last couple of things is you can work in like different team environments and have like multiple front ends connected, continuous deployment, and have like a good AWS recommended architecture of having it span like different AWS accounts. You could easily set that up, and all of the documentation for that's kind of through here. And then yeah, we could host the application, and then this hosting is set up either with S3 alone, or you could set up with S3 and CloudFront, or you could let Amplify manage it all, and it'll set you up the SSL cert, set it up behind CloudFront, and you'll have your application set up and running, and then you could have a Route 53 domain name connected to Amplify really easily. So what our current architecture looks like after last week was we didn't have the S3 bucket, so there's not a ton that's changed. It's been more of a lot of configuration for AppSync and DynamoDB. That's been a lot of the change of creating the different relationships and writing a lot of front-end code. But this is what we have right now. And so we're going to go into depth about like how all this is working and how we have like the different authentication levels and relationships there. And then what we could build this into is maybe we wanted to have something a bit more production ready, and we had a bunch more features. And let's say we wanted to run some kind of like authentication trigger whenever somebody was logging in, then we can have like a Lambda function be triggered during part of the authentication flow. If we wanted to have Elasticsearch set up through AppSync, we would hit a Lambda function, then Elasticsearch, and then we'd be able to return the Elasticsearch objects. We could do our predictions. We could run the campaign with Pinpoint. We could do all kinds of DynamoDB queries. We could build in DynamoDB streams and have like real-time analytics built into our app. Amplify is pretty great at like allowing you to have a lot of flexibility with doing all kinds of different things. So enough with all of that. If we could go into building the application now, or if anybody has any questions, like go ahead and post them in the comments. But what we're going to do now is build the app, and then I'm going to show you guys like what that looks like. Hopefully it goes smoothly, and then you guys would be able to like build this on your own side if you just clone the repo and then run an Amplify init. So what I need to do right now is run Amplify init, which like we talked about before, initializes my Amplify project. So I need to give it a name, give it an environment, tell it what IDE I'm in, what language. We're using React. So my path is going to be frontend/src because it's looking for the source here. Same thing with my build. Okay, so like as you can see, most of the commands that you're doing to set this up are ran through the CLI. So do we want to use the AWS profile? Showed this on the last video. If you haven't set one up yet, like the first maybe 15 minutes of that video kind of show you how to set up an AWS profile. But this is a good way to like set up. I wanted to go into my AWS account because I've got a bunch of different profiles set up. And so this will go ahead and create the basic rules that we need in authentication and IAM policies that we need to start building the rest of our application. And so I think this is probably already about to be done. This just builds the basic stuff for deployment. Sweet. So now that we have that done, what we need to do is we have storage set up, we have authentication set up, and we have the GraphQL API set up. So I'm going to do first is you can run, as you can see right here, the Amplify add will allow you to add different features to the application. So we could go Amplify add API. I'm going to choose GraphQL. Let's see. Call it deeper dive. We're going to select Cognito as our authentication provider. Do the default configuration. We're going to use a username as our sign-in and say we don't need any advanced settings. Don't need any advanced settings for GraphQL. We don't have a schema. Well, we do, but I'll show you guys what this looks like. So again, this is kind of what we talked about last time with the one-to-many relationship with blogs and posts. Allows us to update it right now. So this is kind of what we're working off of. And let's see. So this is basically saying that if you have a blog, then a blog would have multiple posts. If you have a post would have multiple comments, and then a comment has one post, and a post has one blog. And so you could think of this if you're looking at medium.com, and you would say like a publication could be equivalent to a blog, and a post is still a post, and a comment is still a comment. So we're gonna get rid of this. And if you were following along, or if you're able to, if you clone the repo and the schema GraphQL file, which is in the Amplify folder backend API, this file is in there. So what we're doing right here is we have a couple more auth rules set up and a couple more fields. So we're still using the type blog, but now we've got the auth directive set up with a bit more rules. So we're going to allow our owner to have update, create, and delete explicitly, and then we're not going to say read, so automatically he will inherit the read access, and then our editors will automatically have read access. And the reason why I did this is because I wanted everybody to have read access, so that even if you weren't like authenticated, you could like come read the blogs, but you wouldn't have the ability to do anything else other than read them. And so I didn't want to make everybody have to log in to be able to read the blogs and stuff. So this is how you kind of set that up in a simple way. And then so our editors field, we're saying that we have multiple editors, or we can have multiple editors. And then we've got a thumbnail, a name, original image, owner, and writers, and then posts. So then we can have multiple posts. And so I have commented out right here the many-to-many relationship. So we'll talk about that like really quickly, even though it's not built into the app because it didn't really have a good place in this app, honestly. So it's kind of hard to make it fit. But this is saying that a blog would have multiple editors, and an editor could have multiple blogs. And so if you basically saying like if you're in Medium, you can be a part of multiple publications, and a publication can have multiple people a part of it. And so how you could set that up is we have this blog user join table, which is just a table of IDs. And so we've got our blog, which references the blog table, and our editor, which references the user table. And then they're connected to say like this is the editor blogs and this is the blog editors. And then in your user table, you would just connect your blog as well. So if you commented all of this, you'd get one more model that would be created, and then you'd have the ability to set up a many-to-many relationship. So then moving to our post, if you look at the post field, we've got one more authentication field. So this is pretty similar to what we had on the previous one. We're not defining read again. We're allowing the editors to have the same access as the owner, because an editor of a post is the equivalent of like what would be an admin. And then a writer is also basically an admin. The difference here is that a writer only spans a post, whereas editors span all posts. And so an editor has like access to all posts within an entire publication, but a owner has access to only, or a writer only has access to the single post. So then, the same thing here. We have a couple of different fields, title, content. So we've got thumbnail, which is going to be for an image, our original image. And then we have the ability to make our items a draft. And if they're a draft, then that means nobody can view them. Only the people who are authenticated can view them, as in like the editor's owner or a writer. And then we have multiple writers, multiple editors. And then these two items here are different connections that we have. These are what are going to be created out of this. I define these for purposes in the React app. And then this says that we can have multiple comments. And then a comment is kind of similar again. This just says that like a post editor and a post writer, we can have multiple of those, and they would have access to deleting comments. So you could say if people were commenting like bad things that you didn't like on your post, and you were a writer or an editor and you weren't the owner, you could go, like if you weren't the owner of the comment but you were the owner of the post, you could go delete somebody's comments because you're the admin of the post, but you're not able to go update somebody's comments or create a comment for somebody else. You're only allowed to delete them. So then all that content, all that a comment has is just content. And then lastly, the users. So users have, we are using the @key directive here to say that our primary key is going to be a username, and this will be your email that you sign up with, or whatever you allow your username to be. And then we're going to say that the user has access to create and delete their post, and then anybody else could come and I think we're actually having an error here. We should definitely have updates on this as well. Let's go ahead and add that. We'll add that later. So that could be a problem. So if I don't define update, then that means anybody could come and update my user field. So you wouldn't want that to happen. So we should definitely add an update there, just in case it breaks something that I missed. I'm not going to, but that's a little bit of like an error there, because then you talk about like having security enforced on the server side. This would mean that if somebody had the ability to, they could update my user table by not defining that. So that's kind of good to point out. And then like we have on the other ones, we've got a username, profile picture, which is going to be like similar to the original image up the top, a little about me section. And then we have the idea of followers, following, and notifications. And this is something that could definitely be updated a bit, but it does work. Whenever we get into maybe the next iteration of this, we could go in and make this a bit more efficient with using DynamoDB streams or something. But as of right now, like you can have multiple followers, and you can be following multiple people, and you could have multiple notifications. And so notifications just consist of like the type of notification. So if it's a blog or a post, currently all I have are posts as notifications, who the notification is from, and then what post did they update or did they create, and then your followers and following. And then the last thing is the subscriptions, which we're not actually using the app, but I wanted to talk about because I think subscriptions are a pretty awesome feature of AppSync. So this is how you could set up like a WebSocket to say like let's say we wanted to have a chat box or like a chat application. This would be how you could set that up. So if you and your friend were online, you wanted to chat with each other real time, then this would be like a great way to set up to say like, whenever a particular owner, like if you want to have a group chat, you can make an array. Or if you wanted to chat with one person, you could make it like where it wasn't an array and it was just a single string. And you could say, okay, cool. If this person I'm subscribed to sends a message, then I'll get that message back as soon as it gets updated to my table, and then I'll be able to send them a message back, and then we'll be able to like respond back and forth to each other. And so this is a pretty sweet way of like adding in real-time like updates, but it's not great for notifications or things like that, which is what I initially tried to use it for, because if you weren't logged on, to my knowledge, this wouldn't be great, because then you're not able to subscribe to somebody's notifications. There's probably a way around that, but I didn't look too deep into it to find it. So that's basically our API with our different auth rules. So then we have, to recap, we've got a blog. A blog can have multiple posts, and it can have editors of a post, and it can have the root owner of the blog. And then we have post object, and the post can have an owner. It can have editors, which it inherits from the publication or from the blog. And then it can have writers, which can do whatever they need to for the post. And then a comment has the owner of the comment, and then it can have the editors and writers again, and they have access to deleting the comments. And then anybody who is on the application can read everything. And then a user field should be able to have the update on here as well, but they're able to do whatever they want to their posts or to their user profile. So then last thing we can do, amplify, add storage. So we want to add storage now because we just created API, and then we also created the auth whenever we created the API. So we have images that we need to be uploading. So we could go content, images. I'm going to say this is our content, and our bucket name will be amplify, deeper dive, image, content, something like that. And then we're going to allow auth and guests to view it. And our authenticated users, we want them to be able to do whatever to it. And then our guests, we want them to be able to read. And then we can set up different triggers for our S3 bucket. So we want to set up a trigger that will basically turn our photos into thumbnails. So we do want to update our function. So this is what it gives you off the bat. It already sets it up to say like this is what you're going to get from S3. So I've got some code already. Let's see. All right. So paste our code in there, and this is on the repo too. So this is basically just going to grab the image and say we want a height and width of 250. We're going to use this tool called Sharp, and it's just going to turn our image into a thumbnail. And then we need to do one more thing. Since we have this dependency called Sharp, we need to add that dependency to our Lambda function. So we can do here, it's in our package JSON. We'll add this script to install it, and then we'll have the dependency sharp on there. And then this will go ahead and add that dependency to our function, and then we'll be able to run our function and turn our images into thumbnails, so we kind of optimize the images that we have. We can press enter to continue. And then we could run amplify status to see what all we're creating. So we're going to create the auth, the API, the function, and the storage. So we could do amplify push, and this will push all of our resources up. Oops. We'll say yes, we want to create this. So this is going to take a few minutes. It's going to give us a couple of prompts to see how we want to set up our GraphQL stuff in our source folder. And it generates this AWS exports file for us. It's just saying like this is the configuration of our backend project. So as of right now, all we have is that our region is in North Virginia, but pretty soon here we'll have all kinds of stuff to say like this is what our API endpoint is and all this other kind of stuff. Thanks for Cognito and whatnot. And in the future, I do plan on making this into like an actual course that goes way more in depth than like an hour and a half video or live stream, and kind of covers like maybe 10 hours of content to say like start from scratch. How does this all get built? Like what's the thought process behind it? How do we like really get the most out of this and learn everything that's involved? Because it's kind of hard to teach like building a full application in the middle of like an hour and a half of time. Especially whenever your Wi-Fi is going really slow like it is right now. So watch out for like having a Udemy course, and probably post that up here in the next couple of months and give like a promo code so it'll be free for anybody who's watching. But yeah, look out for something that's like way more comprehensive and in depth of like the start to finish of this whole entire thing, and it'll go beyond just what we're doing today. It'll encompass the part 3 as well. Just want to plug that while we're waiting for this to compile successfully and deploy. And if you guys have any like other thoughts or ideas of things you'd want to see us like work on or build, we're planning on maybe doing a series to help you guys get AWS certified, kind of in the works or something like that. But if you guys have any ideas of cool things that you like to see, or like if building like these full applications is pretty sweet, then we'll continue to do that. I kind of enjoy it. I learn a lot from it. But if maybe things go a bit over your head, or if it's not enough time to explain everything, like let us know in the comments. So this is asking us if we want to generate our code for GraphQL, want to generate our schema, like our subscription and mutations. We'll say yes. Let's see. We have a class coming up in July. We're going to go more in depth over ECS. We have somebody coming out local to Denver who's going to be doing that. So watch out for that. Looks like really good content coming out for that one. And then Kevin's got his talk next week, next Wednesday, about data lakes part 2. So watch out for that as well. I'll go ahead and link both of those for you guys. So it's going to take a couple of minutes to update. Now's a good time to go pee or get a beer, get another beer. And then we can kind of walk through like how the app functions. So I think we're probably getting pretty good with things deploying right now. This is deploying all our Cognito stuff. This is deploying our Lambda function. Yeah. That's a good question, Doug. Pretty much exactly what you said. So you can configure like all your different authentication rules for your API directly in this schema. Yeah, everything for like server-side authentication can be defined right here, and then it's all managed. Like hopefully, I can show you really quickly whenever it deploys. I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about, of like how it's actually managed and how they're setting up those different auth rules to in the code to be able to enforce that. But yeah, it's all through that one schema GraphQL file. Amplify, like it's not like we're doing anything that you can't do with AWS. It's just like making things like a shit ton easier for the most part. Like especially if you have like a smaller dev team, I'd say like this is probably a good tool if you don't have like a big company with like super expensive architects that you have to pay for and make sure that they do everything properly and whatnot. Like they're making this like really, really, really good. So that's kind of why all of this is available, is to be able to do that. Yeah. AppSync. So let's see. So if you check this out, this is the AppSync console, and this is what we just built. Yeah, so like with the CI/CD pipeline, I don't know if we're gonna get to that today, but essentially what you can do is Amplify manages all of that. So to answer your question, load. It's going so slow. So to answer your question, in the Amplify console, you can set up like your full CI/CD pipeline. So I've got this like Amplify deeper dive, and then I could say like this is connected to GitHub, right? So my front end environment, GitHub, connect a branch, select my repo. Let's see, hopefully I got my password correct. So I could select my repo. I'm gonna have a ton pop up. Okay, serverless series, branch, master, and then I could go to next. And then this is where you would want to have like I don't know if you're familiar with the code suite within AWS with like code pipeline, code build, code deploy, but this is called a build spec YAML file. And so this is like all code deploy stuff. So behind the scenes, like what Amplify is doing is they're kind of spinning up a Docker container, and then they're running all these different commands to execute your build of your application. And then so in here, sometimes this works, sometimes this doesn't. You might have to like hit next, have it fail, and then update it. I don't know why I can't update it directly right now, but I would need to go in and add commands to say, if I had tests that I needed to run, I could do an npm run tests. I'll actually show you an example. So this is a good example of Amplify with like a really big application that they spent a year building. AWS did. I'll go ahead and link it because this is a really good doc that I've learned a lot from myself. But so they have this Amplify YAML file, which behind the scenes is the same as, it's called a build spec YAML. And so if you're not familiar with it, I'll go ahead and link that too. But basically what this is it's instructions to build, to do the build part of our CI/CD pipeline. And so in this YAML file right here, they've got all kinds of different commands configured for this particular project. And this is a pretty big project that AWS built, and they talked about a reInvent last year too. And so they're doing like all these different things, so like a makefile, and so they've got a makefile for like these different microservices that they have, and they can do like different exports for these environment variables that they have. And then the CI/CD part of your front end is all kind of baked in right here. And so whenever you connect this and you have the CI/CD set up, your entire application's like pretty much coupled, which is like a good thing and a bad thing. It's, I guess you could say, like, I guess depending on who you talk to, there's not like a ton of problems with this being coupled, but some people don't like that, I guess. I don't know, but whenever you have your CI/CD pipeline for Amplify built and you run it, you do a git push to master or whatever your build is, you could set up for your different environments. It's going to go ahead and like rebuild your entire front end. And then if you, part of that, it's going to use the most up-to-date Amplify environment that you have configured with that. And so if you look at this right now, if I hit next, save and deploy, this is going to fail because I didn't set up my file correctly. But you can set this up with the particular backend environment. And then it'll say like master branch works with the master Amplify environment, and then it's all like kind of working together seamlessly. And then you can see right here, like this is the Docker file that they kind of build behind the scenes. That's running our build commands and all that different kind of stuff. And then you can integrate like your end-to-end test or whatever you have right here, and then it'll verify it. And then you have this link, and then you can set up like a redirect for your link, and you can set up like different domains and stuff for your link. So you could have like, this could be awsmeetupgroup.com and have like an actual application with like a legit domain name. You could set up notifications to say like, once it builds, send me an email, things like that. So there's a bunch of different options that you have involved with this. And then even a little bit more advanced, I'm going to talk about this like at a high level. Let's say if you made a PR to master, and master was like your main environment, you could have it built into where you had pull request previews, and Amplify would automatically build you a preview of what that pull request was. And so if somebody was like, hey, you go review my code, you could, instead of having to like pull down their branch and then run it locally, you could run it like as if it were in production, go to like whatever link that's provided from Amplify for that specific PR, and then you can check it out real time and then like give your code review or whatever it may be if something's wrong. And then there's one more thing that you can do that's really cool, is you can manage access to different environments. So let's say you had like a dev team and they wanted to work off of dev.awsmeetupgroup.com versus like app. Or however you have your domains managed. You can manage access to say, this is only required, you can only view this if you have a password. So then your password could be like AWS Meetup Group Dev Team. And then your password could be like password 1234, whatever it may be. And then whenever they go to that site, they have to type in the password and whatnot before they can actually see any of the sites. So that kind of secures any new releases you may have you don't want people to see, be like generally available. Then you can secure all of that with Amplify really easily. Does that answer your question? Give you a moment to answer, but the previous question you had before, I think it's like worth talking about is if you have, how does this manage like the authentication server side? So if I have this big schema built, and Amplify like builds this to be a lot bigger, to be a legit GraphQL schema. Our schema was really tiny. So we have like different input objects, and we need to have define in GraphQL because everything's like strictly defined. Like say I only want to have like my content be a string, not a number, etc. So everything's defined there. Let me see if I can figure out the right spot to get to it. Data sources, queries. I think it's in my schema. Let's see. All right, check this out. Okay, so right here, see if this is a good one. Yeah, so right here is how they're doing those templates to define who has access to this application and who doesn't. And so this is the VTL template. It looks kind of hard to read, but this is how they're kind of just saying like, what is my auth modes? We're going to use Cognito like user pools, and going through all of these different logic to say like get the username of whoever posted this, and then create, and then within this they have like the logic to say like go ahead and create the owner field off of the user that's logged in and take their username, things like that. And then like let's say if you did a query and you didn't give it a specific ID, it'll generate you an ID in here. I don't know where the logic's at. In this one I may have not clicked the correct one, but there is some logic for like if ID equals null, then go ahead and fill the ID with this random UUID, and the template can do all that for you. You can do if statements, you can do for loops, for each loops, all kinds of stuff in this. It's kind of nuts. And then you would just, for this, it's like just return whatever the result is. And then right here, they're updating the DynamoDB object, and this is how all of that kind of functions. And if you don't already know this, this also applies for API Gateway. And so if you're ever doing any kind of work with API Gateway and you want to have like an API Gateway set up to not have a Lambda, or you're using DynamoDB or other like managed AWS services, you don't need Lambdas probably. If you're doing CRUD operations, you don't need a Lambda. If you're doing a simple mutation, you don't need a Lambda. You can write it all in VTL, and it'll save you a lot of money and a little bit of latency too, because if you're having like lambdas, maybe you're not as familiar with like how to properly write your lambdas and whatnot. VTL will just kind of like completely eliminate that. It is at a little bit higher learning curve because like the syntax looks pretty strange, but and their docs aren't like fantastic, and testing it isn't fantastic, but it is a lot more efficient. There is a tool to test these things though. So if you did start writing your own from scratch, which if you use this tool and you wanted to build like an actual production ready app, odds are you're going to need to write your own queries at some point. And so if you wanted to unit test it, this is a really good tool to unit test your different things. And I think I missed this actually, but in the docs here, libraries, something I recently discovered, you can do testing of all of your different things. I forgot where it's at. Here it is. Okay. So then you can test everything locally. And I think GraphQL local. So I think right here, GraphQL resolver debugging. This is to say like if you write your own custom GraphQL resolvers, and they are kind of hard to test because there's not that many services that are able to test them, like you can run this locally and it'll actually test and make sure like, hey, you have an error in your code, you're missing what looks to be a parentheses, and then you could go back and like fix it. And so Amplify kind of has you a little bit covered with that, which is something pretty new that I discovered for testing your different GraphQL custom resolvers and whatnot for whenever you're writing like more complex logic to do better queries for Dynamo or something like that. You have like a niche problem. So it's a lot of rambling on things that we just covered, but our application is done being built. So like I said, we have our backend, we've got an API, authentication, we've got a Lambda function that's going to do some thumbnail generation for us, and then storage. And so like how this thumbnail generation works is if you think of like S3, S3 has the ability to have events, and Lambdas all run based off of events. And so in our S3 bucket, we have, let's see, we have an event configured that Amplify configured for us. And so you can see this event here. We've got 2 different events, and it basically just says whenever we delete an object or we create an object, like the Lambda will go ahead and turn into a thumbnail. And I'm not sure what the delete one does, but I haven't looked at that one yet. I honestly didn't know it created that. But the create one, every time you create a new object, you upload a picture, it'll run that Lambda function to turn it into a thumbnail. So with that all being said, we try and run our app. Before we do, make sure this is correct. That looks correct. And then where are our queries? Sweet, they're already there. I must have typed in something correctly. Awesome. So we could cd into our front end and do an npm start. So what this is right here, this folder, I think we talked about this a little bit last time. This is going to be all of the generated, see this is right here, like generated file, all of the basic like CRUD operations, the basic operations that you will need to do in your application. And I don't think in this app, I actually went beyond any of those. I didn't write any custom mutations at all or queries. So this will say like I need to create a blog or delete a blog, update a blog. Same thing for my posts and my comments and my users. And then all the get operations are here, get and list. So a get would be like get a single one, and a list would be like scan the entire table. Those aren't very good queries sometimes, because if you're scanning the entire table and your table is huge, it's going to be like really slow, kind of expensive. And the mutations is going to say like whenever on this user creates a blog, let me know about it. So this is our application. If you look back to what we looked at earlier on the UI components, authentication, this looks very familiar to what I have here. And so I didn't actually have to write any code to get this set up. And it's got reset password functionality. It's got create account functionality. It's built pretty well. Like the color and everything's kind of plain, but all I had to do to set that up was if you use React, like I have this with authenticator high order function that I can import. And then I basically just need to wrap my component with it and say includes greeting true that says, if somebody goes to my application, like include them with this authentication form, and then they have to either create an account or sign in. So if I tried to sign in, since we just built this, my user doesn't exist. So what I'm gonna do, go ahead and create my account, and then it's going to send me a confirmation email. Sweet. Sweet, so now I should be able to log in. Hopefully nothing breaks. So I've got kind of a weird thing set up. I don't think this is like a very good flow, but I wanted to use that authentication component, kind of like a behind the scenes of what I was thinking here. So I wanted to use this component, but I also wanted to create a user profile. And so what I did was I basically said like, go look at Dynamo every time I log in, which is not great, but every time I log in, it's going to check Dynamo to see if my user is there. And if it's not, then show me this create user component. And And so that's what we're looking at right now. This is going to be the create your profile. So I don't know, I'm just going to put AWS meetup group. We select a picture. I don't really have that many good pictures. Here we go, AWS logo. And then there is our poorly styled application. I'm definitely not a front-end dev, so the styling is going to be pretty bad. But so then we can go ahead and like edit our application, like say, I don't know. Yeah, we'll just add an S. And then we've got meetup groups. If we wanted to update our picture, we just click on the picture, select a new photo. Say we've got this ECS Docker, or let's do this React picture. Save. So there's our app. We can see published posts or drafted posts. So we have the option to do that. If we go to home, this is going to be where all the posts are at. Since we just rebuilt this, there's no data on here at all. There's no blogs. So what we need to do first is create a blog, and a blog is like equivalent to a publication. So this is going to be a new blog. Make me an editor, and we'll make this other email an editor. We'll make this email a writer, and then we'll say, sure, go serverless. All right, so we'll create our post. Cool. So I've got a little bit of a bug here with my front end logic, but there is our thumbnail picture. So this is the thumbnail image. The bug is I'm not properly returning that whenever I return back. I think my Lambda function isn't executing faster than I'm redirecting, but no worries. So there it is right now. And then you can go and check this out and see the image is a little bit bigger. The styling on this, like I said, is pretty terrible, but so then you can see posts within a blog. And so that's to say that we have that hierarchy of a blog has multiple posts, and we have multiple editors, and we have writers too. And so any one of us, whether we're an editor or a writer, could go create posts under this blog now, because we're now have access to this blog post. So now we could say we've got a new post, and we've got great content, and we'll say I'm an editor, and that's a writer, and we're going to add our post to this. We could save it to as a draft. Hopefully we don't get any kind of errors. Let's see, let's do this Docker image. So then we've got our Docker image. We do have a damn error. That's on my end. Let's see. All right, and then let's add this. Let's see what our error is. Cannot read property map of null. That's because we don't have any notifications and I wrote bad logic. That's why. Okay. What's our error again? It is that we don't have any followers. followers. Got our promise all. Let's see if that fixes our problem. Content. Let's do this. I broke our app, guys. Well, anyway, basically what I'm trying to do is create a post that I broke because of my notifications that I built last night, basically. I forgot how I fixed that before. So we're trying to add a post and let's see. Let's go ahead and add that back. I forgot what our error was. And map of null. Let's see. It looks like it didn't update my code. I don't know. I don't see this line here. Am I crazy? Am I looking at the wrong line? I think I am. I was totally looking at the wrong line. That makes sense. Just throw some crap in there. We can edit it once it creates, make it look pretty. I've got some strange images in here from some stuff I was trying to do with recognition. Okay, so we ended up creating every post, but yeah, my thumbnails are all messed up. But it looks like, I don't know, we broke half of our post. It's kind of funny. Okay, well, that's gonna look bad, but we can clean that up later. So now we've got this post. It's called F. It's a great name. Let's see. Let's create another post real quick. A better post with great content. We're going to add it to our blog. We'll save it as a draft. And let's go with this bagel. This bagel looks pretty good. Let's see. Upload that S3 image, takes a second. That's something that we can improve for the next iteration probably. Okay. Then we've got our better post. There we go. That looks a lot better. And then we can edit it. Let's go ahead and publish it. Cool. Now it's published. And then if we wanted to go to our user profile, reviewing all our published posts, we could see all of the crabby posts we just made. So now we've got the idea of like the writers and whatnot. So let's see, we've got our new blog that has this published post and these other posts. Cool. So on this post, we've got this email as a writer and this email as an editor. So those both save the same function more or less for the posts. So let's go ahead and create that other account. All right. Create that account. Need to get my confirmation password, confirmation code. Grab that. All right, so now I can go ahead and log back in. I think my internet's going pretty slow right now. So I need to say who I am, photo, got this photo. All right, so we're back to our blog we left off at. So now I'm logged in right now as austinlovelace517@gmail.com. But I can go ahead and change, like, let's say this picture sucks. So now we have that idea of the different auth rules coming into place. So let's say we'll go serverless again. Add that as our image. Sweet. So there it is. Our better post. Our comments. So we could go ahead and comment and say, this is great. Comment our own post if we want, or we could have other people comment. So I've got my user profile. I didn't actually publish that post, so that post isn't under me. But what we can do is I can go to this AWS Meetup group's profile and I can follow them. So now let's say, man, I broke this too, it looks like. Cannot read property following of null. That's on our page. This is the hard part about rebuilding the app on the fly. Had it working earlier and then broke it again. Oh, right. Where did I write this? User view 171. Okay, so what's our error we're getting? Following of null. Because, I see. Alright, this is a silly error. It's saying that it doesn't have my logged in person. Let's do this again. Let's log back in. Let's find our person, the AWS Meetup group. Let's follow them. There we go. So now we go back to our profile. We see we're following the AWS Meetup group. We've got our posts. We've got the different relationships between our posts. We could sign out. We could sign back in as the AWS Meetup group. We could create another post. And then we'll sign back out and sign back in again. And we should see the notification. We'll go ahead and publish it. Let's see, let's grab this image again. Submit. Cool. So we've got our follower. Austin Loveless is following us. We've got our 2 published posts. We've got our 4 drafts. Since we published that post, it's going to be like public. We can sign out. And then we can go back. Alright, so now we've got a little bell. And we say that this person uploaded a post. We can go check out their post, write a comment. Say this post sucks, and then they could come in here and like update or delete our post or our comment and have that relationship there as well. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's see if I didn't break that one. So we got our new blog. Got a notification post, got a comment, and we can delete their comment and say, you can't say my post sucks. So then this is pretty much where our app is at right now. So we've got, for the most part, we've got a fair bit, other than the lack of like prettiness, a fair bit other than the lack of small bugs of what Medium has going on. What we could do in the future for this, pretty much just let me know like what you think would be best. But what I was going to do was update that notification feature that I just added like a couple of days ago and haven't finished really. But I was going to recreate that and move it towards, where's my doc? So move it towards like DynamoDB streams, which if you're not as familiar with like DynamoDB streams, I recommend grabbing this just for DynamoDB in general. So the guy who wrote this is also an AWS hero. His name's Alex Debris. He wrote this book called the DynamoDB book, and it's pretty great. It's really thorough, 450 pages. It is a little bit expensive, but I mean, if you consider like how much money you can save, like if you're like better at DynamoDB and AWS in general and building a better application, like it's more of like it's going to save you money than cost you money. Yeah, definitely check that out. I just got that the other day and it's been so far really good. So like with that, they do talk about like DynamoDB streams and how to use those and what the point of it is. But a high level of that would say, like, let's say that I have like a new notification come through and somebody like updates the app, then I can have like then that can trigger that request could be sent to a Lambda function that's triggered based off of that put, and that Lambda function can then update whoever my followers are and let them know that I just updated a post or added a new post, and it can update their field and give them a notification. And instead, like, that would be a lot better than what we have now, because I mean, you see the kind of errors I have. The errors I have are particularly around like posts or notifications, I mean. And the notification logic I have probably isn't great either. Like, this is put together late at night. Not very good stuff going on here, but yeah, like we can move all this logic that should be more outside of the front end application more towards like the back end and have the Lambda handle that kind of logic. And we could do this all real time and have it like up to date immediately to say like, hey, like here's a new notification. AWS Meetup group who you follow just uploaded a new post. And then we can add, get a little bit more in depth of those like GraphQL different roles that we have. You can add pinpoint in here to run analytics, run like a campaign. We have like so many different options with like the machine learning. There's just a ton of things that this application could turn into. If you wanted to see like an app that has been worked on by a team for like over a year, this application again is probably the better bet to look at. Not this one. This one, the AWS Serverless one. If you guys want to see like something that's like really thorough and goes through like everything, this is a pretty good one. And they do have a full 14-hour Twitch live stream It might be linked in here somewhere. I don't know what the link is, but their application at a high level is this. And so they've got like step functions set up, and they've got Stripe for payments set up, and a bunch of DynamoDB stuff, and they're using Vue if you like Vue better. So this is a pretty good application to learn a lot from, and they do have like full testing of it. But I think the bigger part of what we're going to do next iteration of this is like, instead of worrying about building so much, like we're going to learn how to scale it, because I think that that's a bigger thing that people worry about. Is like, some people hear serverless and they're apprehensive because serverless with lambdas can be expensive if you build an application that, you know, you're doing big batch ETL jobs, or you have like some things where your lambda is running all the time, and it's just like constantly sucking up tons of like you're just like running your lambda so much it's going to get more expensive, especially if you could just like bypass using a lambda and using a VTL instead. For the most part, that would probably solve most of your lambda problems. And so we're going to test and see like, well, how cheap is AppSync to Dynamo, and how well does this work at scale, and kind of like going into performance and like seeing the times that it takes to do all these requests at scale and how expensive it gets. So we're going to try and spend like $500 or so, or just like kind of like see like what we could get to, and do some math and figure out like how this performs at scale. And so that's what the part 3 of this is going to be about. And I think that's going to be like probably the most beneficial of them all, because building the application is easy, but unless you have like money to just blow away, then it's kind of hard to see like, well, does this work whenever it's like actually being used. So I don't know. I think that that's going to be a pretty cool one. I think I have a link for it. I don't have a link for it yet. That'll be up in a couple of days. I'll go ahead and post that up there, and then you guys can come watch that. And yeah, I think that'll be a good app, and I'll go ahead and make sure to style this a bit more, because it's not super styled yet. We can clean up those bugs and make this something that you guys may be able to go use in the real world. And then, like I said, I'm going to make a Udemy course out of this and make this like a lot more comprehensive, go from start to finish of how we built this, and then go and show like a lot more styled and a lot more features. So it'll probably take me a few months to finish. But I'm going to add in like chatbots. I'm going to add in like maybe push notifications. But I'm going to add in like more features, like maybe some predictions, going into maybe a little bit more in-depth schema. Make this like something that you can actually see in the real world and be like, oh, this makes sense. Like, this is good. And so that's where we're at. Thank you guys for coming out. Hopefully quarantine is not being too terrible to you, but looks like out in Denver we'll have some restaurants and stuff opening soon and go back to the normal ways of life. But yeah, if you guys have any questions, let me know. I'll stay on for like another couple of minutes unless any questions come through. Otherwise, have a good rest of your night and good rest of your week. Let you guys put some questions up. Oh, thank you. Thanks for coming out. Sweet. Yeah, like I said, this isn't going to be like the best place to come if you want to like know start to finish everything that this is going to do. But hopefully like the point of this is to give you a good reference and a good starting point, and something to, whenever you're building your app, you'll have like something to look at. And the inspiration for that kind of came from like these apps and another guy, not the guy who built this, but there's another guy called Nader Dabit, and he's got tons and tons of great content about Amplify and AppSync and serverless in general. So he's an engineer at AWS, and yeah, he's got tons of great stuff here, all going through Amplify. So point of this is just to give you guys like a good starting point so you can build this into your applications at work or side projects or build a company, whatever it is. So anyway, see you guys in a month or in a week if you're going to be at Kevin's talk for the data lakes. Have a good one.